Thank you, and welcome back to the Patriots 300 level podcast. My name is Eric. I'm joined by my co-host Kevin. Welcome back after a little hiatus that we took to begin the off season, and we are now recharged and ready to go full steam ahead for this off season and everything that entails for the Patriots. As a reminder, you can follow us on Twitter/X and Instagram at past 300 level pod for up to the minute updates and commentary on news of the day, and as well as at our website at pats300levelpod.com. Sorry, that was a tongue twister. So Kevin, I know last time we talked, it was after it was announced that Bill was gone, but the day Bill was gone, it was the day before it was announced Jerod was taking over. So in that time, we were talking about Bill's legacy, everything with Bill, but also briefly touching on who we thought was going to take over. And now we have that. We wanted to wait a little bit before we had another podcast, just because we wanted to see what the whole coaching staff was going to shape out looking like. We want to see what the GM front office was going to look like. So that's why we wanted to wait a little bit. So I guess the main point A is new head coach is Jerod Mayo. What are your thoughts on that? How do you feel? Are you feeling happy about that? Or are you feeling upset about that? Are you nervous, excited? What do you think?
I think having him being the coach wasn't really a surprise. Both of us in the last episode predicted that he was going to be the next head coach. And both of us had also said that it wasn't something that we wanted, based on who else was out there.
Yeah. And I
And
think that's the main thing. If it was a smooth transition where Bill was stepping down because he was retiring and he was taking handing over the reins to Mayo, I think that would be one thing.
Mhm,
But for who is available on the market, we've never seen a head coaching class of available coaches this
mhm,
strong, probably ever. Where you have Belichick, which obviously wasn't going to come back if you fire him. But you had Vrabel, you had Harbaugh, even Pete Carroll. I know he didn't wasn't successful here, but he
mhm,
has been a very successful head coach. So he had so many options, and not only did they not go with them, they didn't even interview with any of them. So I think
mhm.
that was the biggest thing for me. Sorry to cut you off, but
No,
I
no
wanted to
worries.
expand upon that point that you were just mentioning.
Yeah, I think the thing that you mentioned too about not being a clean break is a clean transition, I would say, is one of the other reasons where it seemed like everything that's come out after the fact had made this seem kind of more like not really a coup per se, but kind of like that, where uh, Gerard and some of the reports actually kind of make more sense, where some of the stuff that he kind of was doing behind the scenes was maybe kind of not undermining Bill, but also knowing what he knew his contract said that he was going to be the next head coach. I think it just had a little bit of entitlement to him, and not that he fully came off that to the public, but you could see how that may have rubbed some people the wrong way. And just the fact that, like you said, Vrabel was my number one pick.
Me
If
too.
you were getting rid of Bill, you knew that you had a top five coach available, and Mayo could turn into Vrabel. That's what you're hoping for. You have no idea how he's going to be.
Yep.
Why don't you take the sure thing? And that's why I really wanted Vrabel. And Vrabel made sense. Where if you're saying, oh well, Bill's really only got maybe 3 years left in the tank, we have the opportunity to get Mike Vrabel here. And have the next successful head coach for the next 15, 20 years. So that was my whole thinking behind it. And I don't think I've gotten any more kind of satisfied over the last month
Yeah.
after this happened. So starting from the press conference with Mayo and Kraft, and really everything that's come out afterwards, the assistant coaches conference they had last week. It doesn't seem like Mayo is going to be the one to have the backbone to lead this team when a hard decision is going to be had to made. Is it going to be something he relents to Bob Kraft, or is it something he's going to be his own decision and he's going to say, "No, I'm sticking this. This is what I want to have happen." And if it doesn't happen, if it doesn't end up working out, then I am aware of that. I'm aware of the consequences. It just feels like it's something that Bob has the control of Mayo more so than he did of Bill. And not to say that it'd really hard for have anyone um to have as much control as Bill had, but still just seems like I don't know. It feels like we're going backwards, where it's like going from Parcells to Carroll and having that huge change, and it may not work out in the as good as everyone is hoping for.
Yeah, and that's what I'm worried about too. And again, I think if you committed to Bill in this offseason, you're likely drafting a rookie quarterback. And by drafting a rookie quarterback, realistically, you want to have a stable coaching situation. You don't want to have what Mac had, even though Mac had the same head coach. There's so much fluidity in the rest of the offensive coaching staff from year one to year two to year three. So you really want if you're committing to Bill, you're likely committing to him to the next 3 years.
Mhm.
And I could understand to a point of if you think Gerod's the guy, if he's the guy you want going forward, and you don't think he'll be available in 3 years, or you don't want Bill for the next 3 years. Okay, I get it. And rationally, I understand the decision. I just don't fully agree with it. And the
Mhm.
thing that worries me most is, at least with Mayo, I know the players really seem to like him and they seem to gravitate towards him. As they said, he's a leader of men. But the thing with Bill is he always put the team situationally in a position to win year in, year out. They wasn't always success, as we saw this year. But even this year, if it wasn't for one play here or there, they could win more games. They were in every single game except two halfway through the fourth quarter. They lost most of them, but they were at least competitive. Is Jerod going to be a guy that's going to be able to scheme X's and O's to put the Patriots in a position to be in those games? For all we know, he might, but he wasn't the one that was calling the defensive plays. This was likely Bill's defense putting the game plan in, week out. So that's the thing that worries me is Jerod wasn't the defensive coordinator, which isn't always the biggest deal.
Mhm.
Brian Flores was only defensive coordinator for a single year, and that wasn't even a title. But Mayo's only been coaching for 5 years. He's only been coaching under Bill. He's only played under Bill.
Mhm.
And Bill was the one likely putting in the defensive game plan, and Steve was the one that was calling the plays. So does Gerard have enough experience? Probably not to put in the game plans. He seems like a very intelligent guy, so he might be able to scheme it, but that's just my biggest concern is situationally, I think we're gonna see a big drop off. At least year one. Maybe I think there will be a big learning curve. Hopefully he can take it in strides, but that's my biggest concern.
Mhm. And then the fact too that you're losing not just Bill on defense, but you're also losing Steve, like you said,
Yep.
where Steve was the one that would address the team every Saturday, saying this is how we're going to attack every kind of call that we're going to have. So um, I know that everyone said that Mayo was the one that was addressing the room and doing all the kind of leadership thing, but Steve was really the X's and O's kind of this is what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, sort of thing. And that's a big part and
Yeah.
something that Bill has a lot of knowledge on, and Steve obviously has based on how well their defense is played. So it's a big drop off losing those two players and the two coaches. And we're
Yep.
going to get into the assistant coaches in a little bit, but
And
um,
just a couple more points on this before we move on. And I think another aspect too is that I forgot the first point I was going to say, but the second point is I'll try and remember the first point I had. But the thing with Bill is he could coach any positional group if he had to.
mhm,
When he was with the Browns, he was the Browns offensive coordinator his first 2 years there. In 2001, when quarterback coach Dick Rabine passed away, he took over as the quarterback coach. This year, when Adrian Clem had to leave for medical issues, he took over as the offensive line coach. So Bill, and even Chris Long said on his podcast a few weeks ago, Bill is the greatest positional coach for any position on the football field, and he will help put every single positional group in a position to succeed. I don't know if Gerard is able to do that, especially since he's only coached for 5 years. He did play, but again, he only played on defense, and he can, to an extent, help give perspective from a defensive side, but he's never coached on the offensive side. He's only coached really one positional group. And is he going to be able to help with the game plans or help assist with it on the offensive side, help coach the positional groups if need be?
mhm. And then the other thing that you mentioned about him only coaching for Bill is a huge thing because we've seen a lot of the reasons why they say that Belichick trees always fail.
Yeah.
isn't the whole Belichick part itself. It's just the fact that a lot of these guys have only coached for Bill and have only seen it one way and haven't
Yep.
seen it from other viewpoints. The ones that have been successful, you think of Bill O'Brien when, and a lot of people say, oh, he wasn't a good coach. He was a really good head coach for the Texans. And the thing that got him in trouble was running personnel, and that wasn't something he even really wanted.
He was also
Um,
extremely successful at Penn State too.
yeah. So he had a lot of experience elsewhere before going
Brian
to
Daboll,
Houston. Brian Dable, he coached under at Alabama, he coached with the Bills. Um,
Vrabel, even though
Vrabel,
if you consider him part of the tree,
yeah.
some do,
If
some
you
don't.
consider him part of the tree, he ended up coaching at Ohio State. He ended up coaching with the
Houston.
Texans, and then ended up
He
coaching
he
with.
played in Pittsburgh. He played
Mhm.
in Kansas City.
But
The only one you can really point to that had success who only was in New England was Brian Flores. And
mhm,
some people won't say he's a good coach. I think he's a top five head coach.
mhm.
But so
Yeah,
again, that is a concern.
yeah.
But the one thing, at least, some of the comments seem like shots to Bill that he's been saying or the decisions that they're making. But it at least seems like he's not trying to replicate what Bill did, or he's not trying
Mhm,
to be Bill 2.0. He's trying to be his own guy. So even though it might come across in a negative way, that is at least encouraging that he's not going to try and be like Matt Patricia or Josh McDaniels, who
mhm.
once they step in as a head coach, they just try and be someone that they're not.
Yep. No, agree completely. All right, moving on. Eliot Wolf is the second prediction that we got right this offseason, where he's basically the de facto
T
GM.
to an extent, initially when it was announced that Bill was going to be gone, we all assumed that they were just going to go in a different direction. But as after the first few days and they didn't interview anyone, that's when we thought that it was going to go to Wolf.
Hmm. But it was our second prediction we made
Yeah,
before it was announced. So we got a little bit of the timing when it being announced was off, but we were right in the end. So um, and I don't mind this one per se. I'd much rather it be Elliot Wolf than Matt Groh.
yeah,
Just because a lot of the picks that you can tell are Matt Groh people based on what he described and based off of everything that was going on. And Elliot has a lot more experience than Matt had in the NFL with the Packers and the Browns in more of a GM role, where Matt Groh came up through the scouting kind of area. So he at least has a little bit more experience there and would have probably been better groomed for the position. Um, but the one thing with him is that um, he's bringing in a lot of people from, of course, this is what you're going to do because you have your contacts, but he's bringing in a lot of people that he's worked with before from the Packers and the Browns. So it'll be interesting to see, are these people going to be any good, or are they going to just be everyone's cast offs that they don't want from those programs? Because you even look at Alex Van Pelt, and we're going to get to him in a minute. But he was an offensive coordinator and was fired. So um,
he was, but we'll get into it in a minute,
yeah.
which why I'm not as concerned about that.
He's probably the less of the concerns than one of one of the assistant coaches out there.
Yeah,
So, anything you want to add about Wolf? I don't really have much to say, just because it's really hard to tell until we see him in action. We don't really
yeah,
know what's going to happen. We've heard his comments today, and a lot of them make sense. Where you want to play your young guys. The one big thing, which I completely forgot to mention, was his comments. He was saying he was asked about Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi, and he said, "Oh, I'm not willing to comment on any of the players on our team. It wouldn't be fair to them to speak to the media." And then 5 seconds later, he's describing what he doesn't want on a quarterback, and is basically describing Mac Jones with Matt Patricia. So
yeah,
I would like to say that Mac is probably gone. So
yeah.
based off of that, but other than
I
that,
accept it.
his
Yeah,
comments all made a lot of sense, and the stuff that you want to hear, and that's what most of these comments from the coaches have been. They're saying the right things, but there's a difference between saying the right things.
most of the coaches, as we'll
Most of the
get to in a
coaches, yeah,
minute.
we'll get yeah. Most are saying the right things,
Yeah,
but there's a difference between saying things and actually doing the right things. So you look at
yeah,
the Red Sox this offseason, they're going to be full throttle and they're cutting payroll. So
yeah,
we'll see.
yep.
All right.
So
Your
I guess
thoughts
we'll
on Wolf at
first.
all, or do you want to just get into the assistants? I don't
No,
think there's much
I
to
think
do.
just the one glaring thing after Bill was gone and that they gave the reins over to Mayo and it was pretty much kind of assessed that there wasn't going to be any changes in the front office. There wasn't really going to be much changes in the coaching staff, at least not from an ownership directive. It kind of was essentially giving out the impression that, or the statement, the reason why we were in this position is because of Bill. It's all Bill's fault, and keeping everyone else in place but Bill is going to solve it. So I think that's pretty much a bold move. I know the coaching staff has turned over a little bit since then, just because Steve left. He was given an opportunity to stay. Bill O'Brien left. He was given an opportunity to stay. So all the personnel people, front office personnel people are staying for the most part. They added a couple here and there, but it's definitely an interesting something. I 5 years ago, 3 years ago, last year, I wasn't ever expecting it to go
Mhm.
like this.
Yep, no, agreed. All right, assistant coaches. First one, Alex Van Pelt is a former offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns, former quarterback for the Buffalo Bills.
Yep.
Um,
And he was offensive coordinator for a year with the Bills in
mhm,
2009 when the Bills offensive coordinator was fired the week leading up to the season. And then he was kind of the interim
mhm.
OC for the year and called plays then.
Yeah, so he's had most of his experience in like the Stefanski scheme, which is similar to kind of the West Coast offense. So like the Shanahan McVay kind of scheme, if you will.
Yeah. And
Um,
he coached in Green Bay for I think 7 or 8 years under McCarthy as well.
mhm. So a lot of the things that he was saying in the press conference were things that I let anyone would like. You want to mold your offense to the players you have, not
Yep.
kind of fit them into the scheme that you have. Everyone has a clean slate, and then all those sorts of things, and the game plan, sort of initiatives. It was all well to like. Again, the big thing with him is just really seeing how it's gonna work out with him.
Yep.
The Browns did, and again, he wasn't the one calling the plays of the Browns because that was Stefanski, but they were able to get I think what 5 quarterbacks ready to play for the
Yeah.
team this year. So that was a pretty big accomplishment for him. It is interesting to see why they haven't really said the reason why they said they fired him is they wanted to go in a different direction for Deshaun Watson and
Yep.
get him someone he's more comfortable with. Um, I just don't know what would make Deshaun Watson more comfortable. Like that.
Yeah, what a lot of rumors are is that the Browns ownership was unhappy with they've invested so much trade assets,
Hmm.
so much draft capital, and then they invested so much money with a fully guaranteed contract that they don't like the way or the production that Deshaun Watson has had.
Hmm.
And then as a scapegoat, they're getting rid of Van Pelt because as the offense coordinator, as the leader of the offense, they're trying to blame him for the reason why Deshaun Watson has pretty much sucked the last
Hmm.
year and a half. And I mean, maybe that is part of it. Maybe his scheme or his teaching just doesn't go well with Watson, or
Hmm.
it could be Watson after getting that money and being suspended for a
He's out of the league
year,
basically for
almost
almost
a
2 years.
year, and yeah, essentially not playing for a year and a half, might have just coasted and just not put in the effort. So
Mhm.
that's what a lot of people assume the reason why he was fired. The actual 100% reason we don't fully know, but I that reason does make sense to me.
Hmm. Anything you want to add about Van Pelt?
Yeah, so I think the offensive coordinator position is obviously the outside of the head coach is the biggest issue or the biggest acquisition that this team would have to make from the coaching staff because as
Hmm.
we saw the last 2 years, the offense was putrid. A lot of it was the players, the caliber of the players, the talent, but also some of it was the coaching. In 2022, Matt Patricia did a very bad job. Last year, Bill O'Brien, his plays were too predictable, as a lot of defenses saw, but again, that might have been due to the player personnel around him. So I understand wanting to go with a different system, go with the offensive coordinator with a more, as Evan Lazar says, a more modernized offense, whatever the hell that means. But going with
Even
the different
though
system,
like the West Coast offense has been around, I think before or around the same time as the Perkins scheme, so it's
yeah,
not like
I know.
it's not like it's any more modern. And the funny thing to add on that, I don't know if you saw this quote from McVay, But one of the reasons why McVay wanted to bring Kaylee in, and one of the reasons why Kaylee may have stayed there too, rather
Yeah.
and declined the offer from the Patriots, was that McVay wanted to incorporate the Patriot scheme into his offense to add a new wrinkle. Because not many people run the Perkins system anymore. Everyone's running McVay system. So and Shanahan's.
Yeah.
Um, or even the air raid offense doesn't even run as much anymore. So it's mostly
Yeah.
just the West Coast offense. So it's just interesting to see everyone wants this modern offense, and the modern offense is becoming a little bit redundant, and they want to do something different. So
Yeah.
um, it's
Yeah.
just kind
So
of funny to say about that.
yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is for the coaching staff, especially with a head coach that has no head coaching experience, has very limited coaching experience in general, only five
Hmm.
years, only at one position group. Sort of, he was the essentially co-defensive coordinator per se,
Hmm.
but again, he never coached offense. So having a coach on the staff with a lot of coaching experience, I thought was a big point. I had a feeling they
Hmm.
were going Covington as defensive coordinator, which in a vacuum makes sense.
Hmm.
So if that's the case, you have an inexperienced defensive coordinator, you have an inexperienced head coach, you want to have an experienced offensive coordinator.
Hmm.
So that's why I was very happy with Van Pelt, the hire, and seeing he's coached in different systems. He was in Buffalo, he was offensive coordinator for a year, kind of thrown into it. So I think that does help to an extent. So it helped him be prepared,
Hmm.
or you would think he's used to unpredictability. But also the Browns have had success the past couple of years. And even though he wasn't the play caller per se under Stefanski, he was the play caller in their first playoff win in 2020 with Baker Mayfield when Stefanski was out. He has had success. So I was kind of happy with it. And I did like what he said in the press conference this week. As you said, um, he was pretty much saying we're not going to fit the players to this, or we're not going to fit the players to the scheme. We're going to fit the scheme to the strengths of the players, which
Hmm.
again, actually seeing it happen is another story,
Hmm.
but it's good to hear him at least in thought say that.
Hmm.
And then also talking about what he wants in a quarterback, he said the four things you're looking for is leadership, toughness, accuracy, and decision making. Which again, I will see what they end up doing at the QB position, but
Hmm.
good to everything he said in the press conference made sense and everything I seem to agree with. Compared to the other offensive coordinator candidates like Nick Caley, I wasn't big on.
Hmm.
As we've tweeted a lot about it. I don't remember if we talked much about it on the podcast, but he was pretty much passed over for the offensive coordinator position twice in New England. He coached tight ends, and the tight end productivity was pretty putrid during his
Hmm.
time as tight end coach. The only really successful seasons was Gronk in 2017, 2018, and then Hunter Henry in 2021. Hunter Henry regressed 2022.
Hmm.
Johnny Smith was a bust both years. So and then even when he was with the Rams this year, Tyler Higbee had his worst year in 6 years.
Hmm.
So I wasn't really excited about that. And again, would be another offensive coordinator with no experience.
Hmm.
Some of the other guys passed on the position, Zach Robinson, a couple other guys here and there. So out of all the options available, I thought Van Pelt made the most sense to me.
Yep. The only other one that could have made sense, but I also figured he wasn't going to join because would have been Josh, just because I
Yeah,
feel like they think that he's got too much Bill allegiance, and if Bill gets a job next year, he's probably likely wanting to follow him.
yeah.
Instead, he's getting paid for another what 4 or 5 years, so it's not like he needs to make a decision
Yeah.
soon. So,
And then
um,
I also understand wanting to go in a different direction with the offense since it
mhm.
hasn't been successful the past 2 years too.
Yep. So one other thing I wanted to bring up too that made me think about when you were talking about fitting the scheme to the players, not the players to the scheme, is that everyone was going nuts saying, "Oh my God, this is so innovative, so great to hear about that." And then also with Wolf when he was saying that where they want to get the best player available and not like reach for a certain position or
Yeah.
for a need or anything like that. But that's everything that Bill's done over the last 20 years, and everyone just seems to ignore it. Where Bill
Yeah.
would
One hundred
purposely
percent.
go into the draft, having every single, it may not be your kind of best case scenario, but he would have a
Yeah.
starter filled for every position on the team. That way that way he wouldn't be kind of forced into overdrafting someone.
Hell,
Um,
look at last year's draft.
mhm,
Draft number one pick, Christian Gonzalez, where going into the draft, cornerback wasn't really a big need.
mhm,
Number two was Keon White, where they have Uche on one side and then they have Judon on
mhm,
another and Barmore in the middle. And then
mhm,
in the third round, it was Marte Mapu when they have Duggar Peppers
mhm.
and Adrian Phillips. So
So,
again, Bill did that less than a year ago.
mhm.
So
And
it's
everyone
not that
just seems
innovative.
to forget that
Yeah.
that's how we did things, and they're making
Yep.
it seem like it's completely innovative and a breath of fresh air. And then the other thing with the fitting this every single, they were game plan specific, so they would
Yeah.
fit not even just for the season, they would fit for the games. They'd make sure that the players that they had would be put in the best position to succeed. So they weren't going to put someone in there that it wasn't, they weren't going to succeed, and that's exactly what Van Pelt was basically saying. So
Yeah.
it's just really frustrating, kind of some of the kind of disrespect that Bill's been getting. Um, and I get they didn't have a great season last year and even the year before, but I think we'll get into this maybe a little bit later on. But I think some of that was out of his control too.
Yeah.
All right, Demarcus Covington. Let's get this going. Yeah, both of us were expecting that he was going to be the defensive coordinator. I think he was the
Yep.
best guy for the job because he's internal. He has familiarity with the system. It's not something they're going to really want to change over because it's had so much success. Again, it may not have as much without when you lose both Bill and Steve, but you want someone that has that familiarity. And he's been getting groomed for the last couple of years. He was the
Yep.
defensive coach for the Shrine Bowl last year, and they've been kind of giving more and more on his plate. So
Yeah,
I
and he
was.
interviewed last year, I think, for two different defensive coordinator positions. So
Mhm,
a lot of people view him as a rising coach in the NFL.
mhm.
So it made sense if you didn't go with him, if you went with someone else, he was likely going somewhere else in the
Yep.
NFL for a defensive coordinator position.
Yep.
But again, going with him, it does add a little bit of just concern
Mhm.
where just for the whole coaching staff and experience, where you do have experience coaching with Alex Van Pelt, but actual play calling, which coordinators and head coaches, your main job is game planning, teaching, and coaching. But play calling, it's not the top three, but it is important, and you have to have a feel of the game of knowing when to call certain plays. You have to understand how the game is going. You have to have a knowledge of that. And between the head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and then hell throw in the special teams coach, you have one combined year of play calling mixed for two games that's Van Pelt called like sporadically, but one combined year of play calling in the last 15 years, and that was 15 years ago. So it is a concern of just the inexperience between the just play calling on all sides of the ball.
Yep. All right, moving on. Jeremy Springer. So this is the one we kind of alluded to.
Yeah,
Did not really love his press conference. He just seems like a guy that's trying to say a whole bunch of things and doesn't really know what he's talking about.
yeah,
And is basically trying to bullshit his way across. And maybe he's better than this, and it's just he's not really a great like press conference guy. And again, you don't have really special teams coaches doing these press conferences, so it's not like he has a lot of preparation with this, but he kind of seemed like a moron.
yeah.
I wasn't a great
And
fan of him.
yeah,
Um,
I listened to the press conference before Kevin, and my takeaways were I really like what Van Pelt said. I really like what Covington said. I could not stand Springer, but I wanted to see what your thoughts were. So I just texted you saying, let me know. I watched it. Let me know what you think. I didn't want to sway you because I wanted to
mhm.
see if you felt the same way about Springer.
Yep, and I did.
But also,
And
like you were saying, he's said a lot of words without saying really anything, and it's tough to get actual like X's and O's or thoughts in a press conference. You don't want to say too much, but one of the things that stuck out to me was they asked, "So how are you gonna prepare your players for the inclement weather?" And he says, "Well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna practice outside all 4 days every single week of the year." and he was making it sound like it's some brand new innovative thought, and
Hmm.
that's something that Bill has done forever.
Yeah.
But
So yeah, and the other thing is that no one asked him
yeah.
about being one of the worst special teams units last year with the Rams where he came from. So
Yeah. And he
um,
wasn't again, with those, you don't know how much impact is the actual coordinator, how much impact is the assistant, which he
mhm,
was, how much is just not having the right guys. They were a very
mhm,
young team, so maybe it was just that inexperience. But the flip to that is they play more than half their games in a dome where weather doesn't
mhm,
affect you. So to be one of the seven worst special teams units in the last 30 something years for a team that's in a dome is something.
mhm. All right. That's the other thing to mention. Kind of the Packer way was kind of Eliot Wolf's kind of saying over the last couple of days. We've seen a lot of kind of footprints on the team with that. Ben McAdoo, we didn't mention yet. Jerry Montgomery, even Alex Van Pelt had time with Wolf too. So it's just something to keep in mind. Not really much to really expand on this. The Packers have been successful. They haven't won as many Super Bowls, but
Yeah.
um, they have had good programs there with McCarthy, and even though I think both of us think McCarthy at the end of the day isn't a great coach and he'll shoot himself in the foot,
Yeah.
but they've had
Holmgren.
yeah Holmgren and they had even with LaFleur.
Yeah.
Um, again, I think maybe the coaches at the end of the day may not have enough to win, but they have successful programs there.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Quick side note: Steve Belichick leaving the Patriots to go to University of Washington,
Yep.
which I think was a little bit more surprising. As I wasn't expecting him to go to college. I thought he'd
Yeah.
take another NFL job, but going to there where he has experience with Jed Fish, who was the former quarterbacks coach back in 21,
2020.
2020. Who was
Yeah.
21?
That
Was it just Josh?
McDaniels in 2021.
All right. Um, so
I,
yeah.
I think the biggest thing for me, like you said, is I wasn't expecting him to go to college, so that was a somewhat surprise, but it makes sense because if he's go there weren't too many defensive coordinator positions
Hmm.
available, so he'd likely be taking in the NFL, so he'd be taking pretty much a demotion wherever he goes unless he's a special assistant.
Hmm.
And wherever he goes, pretty much knows that he's gone in a year because
He's probably following Bill.
yeah,
Yeah.
assuming Bill gets a job.
Yeah. And speaking of that, Bill didn't get a job this year.
Yep.
Really the only team that really looked at him with the Falcons.
Yep.
We were predicting before about the Cowboys, and again they end up firing McCarthy. The Eagles didn't fire Sirianni, even though we didn't expect him to go to the Eagles just because I think Laurie hates him and he hates him.
No,
I think the
there's
two of
been
them don't
conflicting
like each
rumors.
other.
No one
Yeah.
really knows.
Um, so no one really knows
Supposedly
about
he
that.
has a good relationship with Roseman, but
Hmm. And I could see Bill at his age, like just relenting into what Roseman would want, because
yeah,
Roseman's not leaving, so he's been
yeah,
there forever, and he gets good players, so he's
yeah.
just impatient with head coaches.
Or
Um,
ownership, whoever. Yeah, we don't know.
whoever does the firing, but I think it's
Yeah,
Roseman. So anyway, the Falcons again. I think at the end of the day, and we were kind of talking about this, the Falcons were a good spot,
yeah,
but also not a great spot for him. So they're good in the fact that they pretty much have a lot of the pieces except for the quarterback.
yeah.
So it depends on what you really
And they're in
want.
a completely shitty division. So
Yes. So it's
assuming
easy
you
to rack
have
up
competent
wins.
coaching, even with bad quarterback play,
Even bad
uh,
quarterbacks play what? They had 7 wins last year? Six
they had
wins, six
seven
or
wins.
seven? Yeah.
And then even though the Bucks made the playoffs and they won a playoff game, they were bottom 10 in both offense and defense.
Hmm.
That's not sustainable, especially with their head coach,
Yeah.
uh, who you and me both don't like. So
Hmm.
Bill coaching there and assuming Bill brought in Kirk Cousins or Russell Wilson or drafted someone,
Hmm.
that's easily three division wins over the next 3 years.
Yeah.
But
But the other thing there too is
power structure.
the power structure and also why am I blanking on his name? Because we've talked about him forever.
Rich McKay.
But yeah, Rich McKee was someone that the two of them I guess have a long history of not getting along together. And is that someone where Arthur Blank is going to want to fire one of his best friends um, in order to get Bill? And it's
Yeah.
not something it seemed like he wanted to do. Where you would think the owner is 82 years old. and you really want a championship, why don't you do everything you can to get one while you
Yeah.
still are here? Not to make things all bleak, but there's only so many years left at that age. So,
Yeah.
um, but again, and not the end of the world. And the reports too that Bill was interested, but wasn't something that he was also dead set on either.
Yeah.
There's been other reports too saying that other owners have talked to Bill, gauging his interest for next year, which is also interesting. Why we
I don't think they talked to him directly. I think
Mhm.
they're like talking internally.
Yeah. But it also makes you wonder, like how cheap are some of these owners where they don't want to pay a head coach to fire him just when you kind of know. Even you look at Jerry Jones, where
Yeah.
um, everyone knows the writing's on the wall. McCarthy's going to be gone next year because
Yeah.
the same thing is going to happen year after year, and they're going to choke in the playoffs, and they're going to end up they're not going to have to fire him though because he doesn't have any years left. And that's something
Yeah.
that everyone paints Jones as this cowboy that has this itchy finger. And he just doesn't fire coaches though, like he used to. Like
Yeah.
he's mellowed out way more in the last 15 years.
And the
So
only reason why I guess you could say the only reason why he fired Jimmy Johnson is he wanted the GM roles back, even though Jimmy
mhm.
Johnson just won a Super Bowl, two
Yeah.
Super Bowls in 3 years for them.
hmm
But
So yeah, I still think Bill his likely spot will be the Cowboys.
yeah.
Even Jerry Jones said that he could work with Bill and would want to work with Bill. So
Yeah.
like if you're putting that out there, the writing's pretty much on the wall that McCarthy's going, Bill's probably gonna be there next year.
Yeah.
And I would really I wanted Bill to go someplace that has like history. So the Cowboys or the Packers or someplace big to it'd just be so fitting for him to end his career
Or
at one of
even
those.
the Bills, which granted as a Patriots fan you wouldn't want to see that, but if
Mhm.
he was to go to a team that's just a head coach away, which I think the
Yeah.
Bills are,
hmm
and bring a Super Bowl to a team that is historically has had some success, but a lot no success, but
hmm
never got to the ultimate threshold. And
Yeah.
for him to go in and win a Super Bowl there would be just, I think, a fitting way to go.
Yeah. No, agreed.
And
Uh,
I just last point, I know you
mhm,
briefly touched upon it, but outside of the Falcons job, there wasn't really any job that made sense for him
mhm.
either. So I know that's the only team that he interviewed with, but Seahawks, I guess from a talent wise perspective,
But they already
maybe a
just
little.
they got rid of a
They
coach
fired a
because he was
coach
too
because they
old.
wanted to go
So,
younger,
mhm,
and talent wise, they're like fringe playoff,
mhm,
but they're also not really going to win anything. And then all the other teams are rebuilding. Even the Chargers, even though they have a quarterback, they have to rebuild a lot with how much over the cap they are. And
mhm,
by the time you rebuild it, they're not going to be, it's going to be time for Bill to probably retire, or maybe he
mhm.
gets 1 year. So
And they
Falcons was
wanted
really,
Harbaugh to begin with too.
yeah,
So,
exactly. So
uh,
again, even though he didn't get one, there was only really one job that seemed to make
mhm.
any sense anyway.
Yep. No, agreed. I know one of the other thing we're going to touch on, we kind of already touched on it, would be Robert Kraft and Jonathan. I don't think there's really much to really go over here. We can kind
Not
of,
really. It's just either direct or indirect from the dynasty or things that are getting slipped out in the media or things that are being said. It seems like they're trying to take shots at Bill on the way
mhm,
out, which you and me both don't really like, but I don't think there's much more to say. Again, after having a relationship that long, things can always are bound to turn sour. So, and I get
mhm.
it, but I just wish that it was held with more grace than it was.
Oh yeah, no, agree completely. And I think there was something I saw somewhere on Twitter. Someone posted, what was it? Yeah, they said that they never thought that they could see Bob going from one of the most beloved owners in Boston sports to being one of the most villains in sport in the town in the last 2 weeks. So,
Yeah,
um,
pretty much in the span of a little
yeah,
over a week. Uh,
where everyone loved everything he did, and then it just everyone knows that they're basically kicking Bill while he's down,
yeah,
and um, Dan Kelly had wrote a good blog the other day, and we retweeted it, just saying the writing was really on the wall with his documentary with Bill, where I don't know how Bill could have came back
yeah,
to this team, even if they did well this year based off of everything kind of that because this documentary was pretty much already done beforehand, and it was basically a smear fest trying to blame Bill for everything, and they skip over a lot of the good parts of the whole dynasty, and they make this whole thing be this big bad. Thinking about Bill and how everything wasn't great, and they had the best run in 20 years.
They had the
And I
greatest
think,
run in sport in at least pro football history
mhm,
of 21 game win streak. In the
mhm,
span of 2 years, they went 34 and 4 with two Super Bowls and a 21 game win streak. How do you not
mhm.
even talk about that?
Yeah. And the other one thing I just want to include before we end was just even the Rams piece where Kraft was saying how he was so disappointed in Bill after the Rams loss in the regular season 21 and in 2001, which he'd just be a complete moron if that was the case because everyone that lived through that. So I know there's a lot of reporters out there now that were too young to remember that and didn't follow the season at that point, but everyone remembered that lived through that season. Remember that was the tipping point basically for them to
Yeah,
realize that we can compete with this team. We can make it in the playoffs. We're actually a really good team. We're going up against the number one team in football, and we can compete with them. It wasn't something where everyone was all heartbroken saying, "Oh, we made the wrong decision. Drew should be the starter."
yeah.
Everyone actually had a lot of faith after that. And to say that you were disappointed in him and he made the wrong decision, either you're full of shit,
Hmm.
which it kind of seems like that based off of everything else that's happened in the dynasty and kind of all the other leaks, or you're a moron, which I don't think Bob's a moron.
Yeah.
So it's just
The
that
the
part's.
only other thing I could think of for, I guess, to defend Robert with that is, you know how Brady is like his fifth son, and before Brady it was Bledsoe. If him being loyal to Bledsoe and him thinking sticking with Brady instead of Bledsoe was the
Mhm,
wrong decision, I guess that's the only way I can really rationalize it.
mhm,
And that kind of goes to the point of the amount of balls it took for Bill to stick with Brady. He knew that, and even Scott Pioli said, if
mhm.
this doesn't turn out right, Bill's gone at the end of the year.
Yeah.
For him, especially for something that was similar to what he did in Cleveland per se, where
Mhm,
when Bernie Kosar was released because his time was done, it was the
mhm.
right football decision.
Yeah,
They
they
ended
just
up
didn't
making the
have
playoffs with
anyone to.
Testaverde,
Mhm,
but it pissed off the fan base, it pissed off the ownership, and that kind of led to Bill being shown the wall, even though it was the right football decision. To make that
mhm,
same thing, knowing the outcome of if it's not successful, just shows how much he doesn't really he's not worried about he's just focused on winning, and if it
mhm.
doesn't turn out, it doesn't turn out.
Yeah. And then the if you actually even read Dynasty, the book, I know
Yep,
you did,
yep,
they had actually said
several
at the
times.
beginning of the season that Bill had went to Bob and said that Brady's the better quarterback over Drew,
Yes,
but we can't make the move right now because he understood that he couldn't make the move
yep,
because it just wouldn't it could be a disaster. So
yeah. If
um
he said, I think he said something along the lines of, if it was up to me, Brady would be starting
mhm,
game one. He said this in the end of training camp or end of preseason in
mhm.
2001.
Yeah. So yeah, all of the heat that Bill gets, it's driving me up a wall, and people I think have to remember kind of what happened. A lot of them weren't around. A lot of the younger folks that are covering it just weren't old enough to remember some of the stuff that
Yeah,
happened, so they kind of gloss over a lot of the decisions and coaching and development that Bill had of Tom. So
yeah.
I don't want to get into this whole
Yeah,
who's more important.
one
So
thing I'll leave you all with, and after Bill was gone, I was upset. I know you were. And one thing I did to kind of, I guess, cope as
mhm,
part of my stages of grief was I rewatched the Bill of Football Life documentary. I rewatched the two Bills, and then I rewatched all the, what is it, Do Your Job after the 2014, 2016,
mhm,
2018 Super Bowls, and then starting reading all the Patriot books. Like I read the Dynasty a couple times, and that's on my list this offseason. Patriot Reign, all the Michael Holly books, and then also the Super Bowl movies,
mhm,
starting from the Super Bowl 36. And you see in all of these the how different of a coach Bill is from pretty much all the other coaches in football, just from
mhm,
how intelligent he is, how pretty much his brain is the biggest algorithm there is.
mhm,
But you see how week in and week out he's putting the team matchup wise, scheme wise in the best situation to win. Doesn't always work out, but it's just fascinating to see, and I highly recommend if you're a Bill loyalist like us, or
mhm.
even if you're not, just to rewatch all of these, just so you can at least have an appreciation for everything Bill has done.
Yep, agree. And you can find those on YouTube. I know Eric has the DVDs because he's an old
I do.
person, but they're all on YouTube right now, so you can
Yeah.
watch them all there. And the one quote from the Dynasty I just want to say it was one of my favorite things from the clips. It was Ernie Adams talking about Drew Bledsoe when he was telling Scott Pioli. Well, Scott Pioli was recounting the story of when Ernie Adams was telling him. Ernie's quote to him was, "Drew, he looks like a wildebeest under attack." So. And that was just by the how Drew faced the pressure just because he was getting hit so much. So
Yeah.
I just thought that was kind of funny line. But anyway, that's it. We'll be talking to you guys soon. Free agency starting in a couple of weeks, so we'll have a preview with that. Who to look forward to that.
Yep.
What the signing should be.
Combines this week. Pro days are starting. Free agency, trade,
Hmm.
draft. So we'll have a lot of content this off season, and we'll be back soon with preview for free agency. If there's any news that breaks before that, if there's anything from the combine, we'll be here to talk about it.
All right, so sounds good. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Pat's 300 Level Pod for any up-to-minute updates. We're getting a lot of tweets and action out there. And subscribe, rate, and review. And talk to you guys next time.